Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me. And I know a few of you who are in the live chat now were also just joining me for the live premiere of the new Steve and Stuffy episode that just finished like 15 minutes ago. So thanks to all of you for showing up for that. I hope everybody enjoyed the new Stuffy episode. If you didn't get to see the premiere, it's on the channel. You can go watch it whenever you want. So, hi, everybody. Welcome to another Ask Away. As usual, I will ask those of you who are with me live if you have questions that you want to ask me in the live chat, please hold on to them until I get through some pre-submitted questions from Patreon patrons, and then I will spend the rest of the show, however long that is, answering your questions from the live chat. And especially if you were planning on being generous and sharing a super chat. I may not even notice it if you don't wait until I'm paying attention to the chat, because when I'm answering patron questions, I'm just doing that and I'm not really looking at the chat. So with that out of the way, welcome everybody, and let's go to the first of my pre-submitted Patreon patron questions. And the first one comes from Michael Hainline, who says, what are your thoughts on progressives who say they will only vote for their preferred candidate in the 2020 general election? And if their fave doesn't win the Democratic primary, then they aren't voting Democrat in the general, even if that means Trump will win again. I personally find this stance upsetting and worry as I hear it more and more as Democrats tear each other down. Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I find it upsetting as well, and I feel like, I just want to grab people and just shake them. You know what I mean? Not like, I don't want to do anything too violent, but just grab them, just be like, what is wrong with you? You know? Part of it is, I feel like some people have trouble shifting from the primary election mindset to the general election mindset. In the primary election, you should vote for your favorite or for the person that you think is the best person for the job, right? You should not worry about electability, not worry about who, you should just focus on, this is the person that I think best represents, in this case, the Democratic Party. This is the person of all these people that I think would be the best president, and vote for that person, whoever it is. And then you have to shift from that mindset to supporting whoever gets the nomination. And believe me, I know that there is going to be probably some nose holding necessary. There will be many Democratic primary voters whose favored candidate will not be the person who ultimately gets the nomination. And trust me, if Biden ends up getting the nomination, I'm not going to be thrilled about that. Biden is not the person I want to see get this nomination. But if it is Biden, I'm voting for him in November. If for no other reason, then he would be an infinitely superior president to Donald Trump. And let's face it, he would be a better president to pretty much any Republican you could think of. As lousy as Biden is in many ways, and as much as I would vastly prefer someone like Elizabeth Warren, right? If Bernie if Biden gets the nomination, I'm going to vote for him. And I would vote for him no matter who the Republicans were running, because a shitty Democrat is better than even a good Republican. Like, to me, there's no contest. So it does upset me when people say, well, if Bernie doesn't get the nomination, or if Warren doesn't get the nomination, or if whoever their favorite guy is, if fucking Andrew Yang, guess what? Andrew Yang's not getting the fucking nomination. If Andrew Yang doesn't get the nomination, then I'm not voting for whoever the Democratic candidate is. Well, yeah, that bothers me. That bothers me, because you're basically saying, well, Trump is better than whoever the Democrats nominated. And that just isn't true. Like, I do not understand someone who can support a Democratic candidate in the primary and then be okay with Donald Trump getting elected president in November. I don't understand that mindset at all. So yeah, I'm with you. I think it's upsetting. Next question is from Sam. I'm watching a lot of Quantum Leap, so I had to restrain myself from saying that like Al would say it. Oh, what the hell? Sam! If you could recast all the Steve and Stuffy characters as Muppets, which Muppets would play which characters? Oh, sure. So we'll recast characters from my show with characters from a much better, more iconic show. What a sensitive question, Sam. Um, well, Stuffy would be Kermit. Stuffy would be Kermit. See, if I go by their prominence in the show, then you would think that like Toby Benson would be Fozzie, but Toby Benson and Fozzie are a complete mismatch in terms of personality. Obviously, Millicent would be Miss Piggy. That's a no-brainer. Stuffy as Kermit and Millicent as Miss Piggy are obvious. Although it would mean that Stuffy and Millicent would become love interests to each other, which is a little strange. Like, I've never really written them that way. But let me see. Maybe who would be Gonzo? I don't know. Gonzo's kind of a performer. Maybe Hans could be Gonzo. I don't know. It's tough to think because I mean there aren't like obvious matches. You know, it's not like, oh, that, Jack is clearly the Rizzo the Rat of the group. Like which is good. It means that I haven't ripped off the Muppets. It's not so easy to be like, oh, that one is that one and that one is that one. But the only ones I'm sure of, I will say that Stuffy is definitely Kermit and Millicent is definitely Miss Piggy, and maybe if you squint, you could, if Fozzie had more of a mean streak, then you could say Toby Benson is Fozzie. Next question is from Alan Norton. Are there any plans for a crossover between Steve and Stuffy and the Whirlpool? Sorry if this has already been answered. No, it has not. Or I don't think this question has been asked and answered before. If so, it's been a little while. There are no plans at the moment. But there is potential, yes. I have dropped little suggestions that the two shows occupy the same universe. There was an ad on a Whirlpool episode for the Mid-Atlantic Food Bank that was narrated by Stuffy. Or not the Mid-Atlantic Food Bank, the Anti-Hunger Alliance, the sort of governing body that Mid-Atlantic Food Bank is under. That was an ad on a Whirlpool, and there have been a couple of there references to Wilkes-Barre, which is where the Whirlpool is set. There was a reference to Wilkes-Barre in last week's Stuffy episode. So there are little, nods and winks and acknowledgments that they exist in the same world. So the potential is there at some point, but we have no plans at this time to do anything like that. But it's it could happen. It probably will at some point, but no plans at the moment. Next question is from John Brockman, and he footnoted it because, he likes to make this as difficult as fucking possible for me to read on the show. So John says, so your friend and mine, some random geek, recently declared that they hate Christy Winters. Footnote. Geek doesn't actually hate Christy, never said that. With her duty head, footnote, or that, and stupid face, footnote, or that looks like a butt, footnote, or that. This very definitely real hatred originates in her recent video, where she said much of her distaste for Bernie Sanders lies in his betrayal of the Democrats by running in their primary up in syrup country, then repudiating the nomination and running as an independent in order to make sure he doesn't have competition from the left. She also noted she doesn't like socialism and favors capitalism, which is a garbage system for garbage people to do garbage things. Footnote. Confidently, I can say Jonathan will agree with that statement. She also said she really dislikes Bernie bros, but that's a totally fair and accurate thing to say because they're the worst. So where do you stand, Steve? Are you loyal to the Dems or to the people? Do you hate capitalism, or do your retirement plans include a brief but pleasant opportunity to stand in front of a wall smoking a cigarette? Footnote, we probably won't murder you. Footnote, no promises. My loyalty is more to the people than to the Dems. I am loyal to the Dems because the Dems are my best option at the moment and my best option for the foreseeable future. Politically, if I want to make my vote count as much as it can count and be used towards something as positive as I can use it towards, then I feel like it is required of me to vote Democrat. because they of the two major parties, they are vastly preferable. And even though they are not as I would like them to be, they are the best option. And so my loyalty is to them, but my loyalty is not, I'm not a I'm not like a bleed blue Democrat. I am a Democrat because they are the best party of the available viable options. And I would like to see them improve. I would like to support them in a critical way, and try to push them a little bit and get them to be a little bit more progressive. And yeah, I mean, yeah, of course there are things about there are things about capitalism, many things about capitalism that I hate, that I wish were different, and it may be necessary to just get rid of it and to try something else. I'm not completely opposed to that idea. But as I think I've said before, and I haven't really moved that much from this position, I'm not of the opinion that capitalism must absolutely be destroyed in order for the world to be a better place. But I'm not opposed to that. Like, I'm not saying that we must preserve capitalism at all costs. I mean, capitalism is a system under which all kinds of horrific exploitation and things have occurred and can occur and are incentivized to occur in many ways. So I've said before, I am a guilty capitalist. I am not a proud capitalist. I'm not someone who is given to defending that system with a great deal of energy. I am a guilty capitalist. I'm a capitalist because perhaps due to a lack of imagination on my part, or a lack of education on my part, it's it's something I can envision hypothetically, theoretically reforming to a point where it would be at least a lot more suitable than it is now. So I am not necessarily a revolutionary, but there are all kinds of things about capitalism that I detest, and I would love to see reformed or done away with entirely. Dr. Babylon, I just finished Deep Space Nine, so now we can talk about Gul Dukat. Star Trek has never shied away from anti-racism allegories. To be honest, I dislike most of these stories. With the Cardassians and Gul Dukat in particular, however, I feel like Star Trek finally got it right. In Dukat's mind, the Cardassian occupation of Bajor is justified by Cardassians being the superior race. From this supposed superiority springs a sense of paternalism and entitlement. Objectively speaking, what the Cardassian Union did was steal Bajor's resources, enslave Bajor's people, and probably set back its development by a century, but in Dukat's mind, they were bringing progress and civilization. Dukat not only whitewashes the atrocities of the occupation, but blames them on the Bajorans for resisting. His hatred of the Bajorans comes from them rejecting that superiority and paternalism. He considers them ungrateful for wanting freedom instead of appreciating how gentle he was while oppressing them. In my opinion, Dukat's arc reached its natural conclusion in Waltz, and he should have died in that episode. Unfortunately, he didn't, and the writers needed something for Dukat to do, so they gave him the Pa-Wraith subplot. Dukat went from an uncomfortably realistic portrayal of racial chauvinism to a cartoon supervillain trying to unleash an army of demons and destroy the universe. I couldn't tell why he wanted to set the universe on fire at the end. His defeat in the series finale felt anticlimactic. It didn't tie into the Dominion War storyline, and didn't feel like a thematically appropriate resolution to his character. What are your opinions on Dukat's characterization and his final season storyline? How big do you think the overlap is between Dukat's defenders and people who hate Discovery for being too politically correct? Oh, that last bit is a really interesting question. Yeah, I mean, well, I don't think Dukat's final season storyline is the best that we see of him. I don't think I think it definitely could have been better. I see now that we see where they were going with Dukat. They really wanted to end the show where Dukat's storyline intersected with Sisko's storyline, and Sisko's sort of final test on the show as the emissary was facing down Dukat, who by that point had become Sisko's equivalent with the Pa-Wraith. So it makes sense, and I see where they were going with that, and I appreciate what they were trying to do with that by setting them up as opposites and then having them clash. But yeah, I agree with you that I think Dukat was more interesting when he was a bit less of an obvious supervillain. Now, I'm not one of those people who thinks, oh, they ruined Dukat. You know, Dukat Dukat was always evil, as you point out in your question. Dukat was always an agent of oppression. Dukat was an analog for a Nazi or some other kind of racial supremacist taking part in a genocide campaign. No matter how charming he was, no matter how measured he was, no matter how much complexity they gave him and how nuanced he was, and no matter how likable he was from time to time as a character, he was evil. He was never anything else but evil. And yeah, it is a little jarring in the final season, in his final few appearances, when it's like, oh, now he's just out and out evil. Like now there are no more shades of gray. He's just evil and that's it. Yeah, it's not quite the same as the portrayal that they had given him for most of the rest of the series, but it's not completely out of character. Like he was always evil. And yeah, I think people who find Discovery too politically correct are probably the same kind of people who would want to defend Dukat and defend him as not being an evil character. I mean, I'll defend Dukat as a good character, as a great work of fiction. I think Dukat is one of my favorite characters in all of Star Trek, but he's a villain. He's evil. You know, what he does is wrong. He's not like a tweener. You know, he's not an anti-hero. He's a villain. He's evil. He's a murderer. He's an aspiring mass murderer. He's a racist. He's someone who took part in Star Trek's version of the Holocaust. He's evil, right? And I think the same kind of person who would try to insist that he's not evil or would admire him in some way might be the same kind of person who would find Discovery to be too politically correct. So I think you might be onto something. There is a certain segment, a certain rather ugly, unfortunate segment of the Star Trek fan base that seems to genuinely think that Gul Dukat was a good person, or at least not a totally bad person. And yeah, that same kind of person might feel that way about Discovery. Sure, I think it's possible. I can't recall ever talking to someone who held both of those positions, but I'm sure it has happened. I'm sure it's possible. Next question is from David Colby. 2 years from now, an inventor working in a lab trying to build a gravity wave detector accidentally builds a relatively inexpensive warp drive, an engine that can fold space like in Star Trek. Relatively quickly, humanity begins to use this to do various exciting things. Fusion power is easier when you can manipulate space. Anti-gravity is easy when you can manipulate space-time. Space exploration, you get the idea. The upshot now is that by 2025, Steve Shives, YouTuber, now has it in his fiscal capacity to buy a personal spaceship capable of going several light years per hour. Where would you go first, and how many Steve and Stuffy videos would you shoot on the moon? And how many on Mars? Would you head to TRAPPIST-1 or Alpha Centauri first? Also, I have a new book. I write fast, okay? To walk the constellations, millions of years in the future, humanity is now spread across a vast, decaying hyperspace network. Then, an orphan scavenger on the furthest edge of that network is swept into a star-spanning adventure when she discovers she is one of the mythical liminal knights. Check it out, and there's the link, and I forgot to add the link to the description of the video before the show started, but I will add it to the description after we are done with the show. Always happy to plug your books there, David. Where would I go first with my personal spaceship capable of going several light years per hour? Yeah, I mean, I would love to. Obviously, I would love to visit the moon. I would love to go to Mars if it was not, if it was feasible. Of course, God, I would do a whole season of Steve and Stuffy on Mars. Can you imagine the stories you could come up with on Mars? I could have a stuffed animal representing Martians. There could be Martians, stuffed animal Martians. Like, come on, there's all kinds of shit you could do. But personally, I would like to go to Alpha Centauri because Alpha Centauri, because that's a name that I have known a lot longer than I've been aware of the existence of TRAPPIST. I would like to go to Alpha Centauri just to say I've seen it, because I mean there are so many stories that take place in fictional versions of Alpha Centauri or reference Alpha Centauri. Ever since I was a little kid and I first started studying astronomy, I've known that the Alpha Centauri, are technically Proxima Centauri, but Alpha Centauri is the closest stellar neighbor to our solar system. It's the closest star to our sun. So I would go to Alpha Centauri first. But yeah, there would be so many Steve and Stuffy episodes on Mars, absolutely, and the moon and everywhere else. Next question is from John Gingras. In Deep Space Nine, how do you suppose Odo's comm badge is? Do you suppose Odo's comm badge is an actual comm badge, or is it part of his body? If it is an actual comm badge, where does he put it when he shapeshifts? The objects, life forms he turns into are accurate so as to be indistinguishable from the actual object life form. You'd think having a comm badge jammed in there somewhere would make it sort of obvious that something was wrong, not to mention the physical problems that could arise when storing things in life form bodies. If it's a part of himself, does that mean he can duplicate electronic objects when he wants to? He uses his comm badge in the show, so it's definitely functional. If so, could he then turn his hand into a phaser if he wanted? An emergency beacon in times of need? A spare warp core? Anyway, I hope you have a great weekend. Well, thank you. I hope you have a great weekend too. Thanks for the question. I think it is a combination. I think there's a line. I think there's only one line in an episode of Deep Space Nine where Dr. Bashir mentions that when Odo is taking the form of a particular life form, that when you scan him with a tricorder, he reads as that life form. And I think that was put in there to plug a plot hole, because they wanted one of the big ongoing storylines of the second half, really, of Deep Space Nine is the infiltration of Federation space with changelings. And if a changeling could be detected with a tricorder, it would be a lot easier to root out the infiltration. So they had to sort of hand wave that and say, oh, well, when changelings take the shape of a different thing, then when you scan it with a tricorder, if a changeling is taking the form of a rock, then it just scans as a rock. So they had to do that to make sense, but to avoid that plot hole. But it doesn't really make a lot of sense unless you believe that Odo is such a proficient shapeshifter and other changelings are such proficient shapeshifters that they're able to not only create the outward appearance of whatever they are appearing as, but they also can do internal organs and cellular structure. I mean, there's all kinds of ways. If you think about it for 10 seconds, it just completely falls apart. Like, wait a minute, what? So I think that's just one of those things that we're just going to have to accept. Doesn't make sense. And we just have to follow the advice of the Mystery Science Theater 3000 theme song and say to ourselves, it's just a show. We should really just relax. As for the comm badge, I have wondered about that for years. And I think the answer has to be that it is clearly a real comm badge. And I think he has to conceal it somehow. I think that's the only explanation, is that he has to conceal it within his body somehow. So if Odo takes the shape of like a whiskey glass to eavesdrop on somebody in Quarks, in the bottom of that whiskey glass, in the solid sort of opaque part right at the base, his comm badge has to be concealed in that part. You know, if he's doing the appearance of taking the form of a hawk, then the comm badge has to be inside the body of the hawk. He has to carry the comm badge with him at all times, and it has to be concealed in the body of the thing that he is. That is, I think, the only way it makes sense. Next question is from Jamison Rice. Have you heard of, and do you have any thoughts on Hasbro's latest misguided marketing debacle in its Monopoly line, Ms. Monopoly? I'm not sure if it's worth chiming in on per se, but in addition to coverage of the game explaining how the rules changes are misguided at best, I've seen certain alternative coverage claiming it validates their anti-feminist viewpoints. I know Star Trek is a much more fun topic, but I just felt like throwing this out there. Well, I appreciate you throwing it out there, but I am not familiar with this, and I didn't have time before the show to look this up and find out about this story. So I'm not familiar with the Ms. Monopoly or Miss Monopoly, however it's pronounced, controversy. So I'm afraid I can't weigh in on this, even if I would have wanted to, because I didn't do my due diligence and look up I didn't have time to research what this question is about, and I'm not familiar with it. So I'll have to get back to you on that. Next question is from Eddie Stone. Hi, Steve. If you were in charge of a new series of Star Trek, what story would you want to tell? Myself, I longed for a Star Trek Maquis back in the day, and I still think there's a great story yet to be told about them. Love your stuff. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you very much, Eddie. Um, People have asked me what would I do if I had a Star Trek series before, and I never quite know what to say. I don't have like a crystal clear idea in my mind. I don't have a premise of, oh, if they gave me a Star Trek show, I know just what it would be. I don't know. The other day I was watching. It's been a few weeks ago actually, and I think I've mentioned this. I mentioned this to other people. I don't know if I've mentioned it on this show before, but if I have, please just bear with me. But I'm a big fan of Agents of Shield, and I've also been watching NYPD Blue on Hulu the last few months and just really plowing through it. And NYPD Blue has always been one of my favorite shows, and I loved it when it was originally on. And now I'm going back and watching it again. And I'm going to do a series about it, a video series about it, whenever I get through it, whenever I finish it. I have ideas for a 12-part video essay series about NYPD Blue, looking at various aspects of the show. So I'm really looking forward to doing that. And one actor that NYPD Blue and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. have in common is Henry Simmons, who in NYPD Blue, in the latter half of the series, comes on and plays Detective Baldwin Jones. And of course, on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., he is Mac. And I love Henry Simmons. I think he's just a fantastic actor. I think he has a wonderful presence on screen, and I think he's tremendous. And I thought, God damn it, if I did a Star Trek series, he's who I would want to cast as the captain. Because he's a really big, imposing guy, and sort of like the natural inclination might be to say, oh, make him a Klingon, or make him, someone like an alien with like a really physically imposing, like, violent nature or physicality or something. And I thought, no, he should be the captain of the ship. He should be a human, and he should be a member of Starfleet, and he should be the captain of the ship that is the focus of the show. So that's all I've got. I know that I would want to do a Star Trek show, and if I had my druthers, if I could just wave a magic wand and do whatever show I wanted, I would cast Henry Simmons as my Starfleet captain, and the show would be about his ship. But other than that, I have no idea. But it would really just be an excuse to work with Henry Simmons and to get him into Star Trek, which I think would be fantastic. Next question is from Francois Lacombe. Supposing some trickster deity condemns you to the fate of Colonel Stephen Ritchie in the TNG episode The Royale, allowing you to pick the book you will be spending the rest of your life in, which book would you choose? One of my favorite episodes of TNG, by the way, a terribly underrated episode. I love The Royale. Guest starring Sam Anderson, one of my favorite actors who played Mr. Gorpley on Perfect Strangers. Yeah, what? Oh, you know what? It would probably be a Sherlock Holmes novel, or maybe if I could cheat, I would have a Sherlock Holmes volume of short stories. I would say, can I have the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, please? The first volume of Sherlock Holmes short stories, because it would be wonderful to live. If I had to live my life in a world built around a novel that the aliens found on me, I could think of worse fates than having to live at 221B Baker Street. So that's what I would pick. I think if I had to choose. Wellington Marcus, Steve Shives, I've a question about etiquette. What is the proper way for a male presenting person to elevator when in an elevator with a female presenting person when the two people are strangers? I'm a cis male and have talked to several women about this, and we come to the conclusion that the male should stand closer to the door so that he's not behind the woman, and that the male should leave the elevator first if both people are getting out on the same floor. That way the woman does not feel like she's being followed. If the woman leaves the elevator first, fine, the man has not been creeping during the elevator ride. If he leaves first, fine, all is good as well. I think that men in general need to do better, and this is one of the ways we can help make the world more gooder and perhaps one day make the world the bestest. What is your take on elevator etiquette? I think those are all great tips. I agree. Don't be behind the person. If you're a man or a male presenting person, don't be behind the woman. Just be aware of how you may be perceived to the other person, and try to carry yourself and conduct yourself in a way so as to minimize any threat they may perceive from you. The key is to just have some self-awareness and try to have a little bit of empathy with the other person. So yeah, getting out of the elevator first so they don't feel like they're being followed is a really good suggestion. Not situating yourself behind them is a really good suggestion. And just in general, try to be aware that if you are a man and you are in an elevator with a woman, that statistically speaking, you represent a threat, whether you actually do or not, whether you mean any harm or not. And it may not even cross the woman's mind. She might not even think of it. She might not feel threatened at all. But if she does, I feel like it's your responsibility, if you are the man, to try and minimize that discomfort. And yes, absolutely, the suggestions in your question are spot on. And I think it is a very, very good idea that we practice good elevator etiquette, and not just in elevators, in any kind of situation where you're alone with another person who might view you as threatening, to be conscious of that and to try your best certainly not to add to the threat, and to try to make yourself seem, as unthreatening as you possibly can. Next question is from Ohoyerno. Maybe the USA could sell Puerto Rico to Denmark. The Greenland thing is just so quintessentially American. Not just a Trump thing, but truly American. But at the same time, it's just colonialism toward Europe, which hasn't happened in over a millennium. It's been eye-opening, actually. So let's return the favor. Here's my actual question. Would you be fine with me donating to the Democratic candidate for president once the primaries are over? I'm not American, but because of Citizens United, I have a way to vote for the person who's more or less president of the world. Yeah, I mean, I have to say I'm not super comfortable with non-Americans being able to donate to American political candidates. I think in most cases, like it would not be. It's not like you would be putting your hand in a candidate's pocket. Or putting the candidate in your pocket, I should say. I don't think there will be actual undue influence going on, but just the idea of it, I just don't think is good. And I just don't think that that's something we should be okay with. I feel like an election is a national election is something that should be handled by the citizens of that country, and any sort of interference from outside the country is rightly to be sort of looked to be frowned upon. But you make a good point about how the president of the United States is sort of the de facto president of the world, and to me that just makes me think, we really should have some kind of world government, so that there can be an actual elected person who has a legitimate title as president of the world or leader of the world or prime minister of the world or whatever, so that people don't have to feel as though, the president of the United States is basically the leader of the world, but most of the world doesn't get to vote for them. I mean, that's a completely reasonable concern to have. And if we could come up with some kind of legitimate government body that, something analogous to the European Union, perhaps, that maintains and preserves a large measure of sovereignty for the member states, but also has sort of a unifying body, just a layer above that, I think that would be tremendous. And then we could all vote for that person, whoever that person is. Next question is from Isaiah Taylor. Hey, Steve, I just heard that my hometown of Tallahassee, Florida, will be the latest city in America to host the live-action Live PD TV series, where cameras tag along to report the raw and gritty lives of first responders, mostly fire and the police. Let me be clear, I support the police most of the time and understand that their job is difficult. By the way, thank you for mentioning your father's Navy service. As liberals, we tend to stray away from those topics because that's conservative territory. However, do you, Steve, think that such media exposure is good for cops? We, as organized societies, have always had cops and fire brigades for the last 200 years, so people know what those jobs entail. I believe that these shows are nothing but poor shaming and America is in constant danger porn, in which business owners, preppy white rich elites, religious conservatives, and others mock and shame those who, in their eyes, didn't make the grade or didn't pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Shows like this are intended to make otherwise boring and underachieving do-gooders feel empowered by heroes they wish to emulate. However, society is much more fluid than that. The thin blue line term is used to state that the police are the barrier between the citizenry and the criminals, when anyone can be a criminal, no matter how high of a position they are. We just had here in Tallahassee a massive corruption probe in our city government where our former mayor was charged with fraud. It's usually the suites in the higher levels that causes the crimes at the lower levels. I'm going to be honest, I was never this goody two-shoes who believed in that I believe in America bullshit, but I find shows like this kind of divisive. It tries to communicate transparency, yet falls short on ambiguity. I could be overthinking it, but what are your thoughts? I see things similarly to how you see them. I do think crime shows, and especially reality-based crime shows like that, do tend to focus on street crime and on crimes committed by people from lower economic classes, and that creates, I think, a misleading impression of the nature of crime and the nature of what a criminal is. And I don't think that's a good thing at all. I think that warps our perception of our country, of our society. It does create kind of a separation between people who are not criminals or think of themselves as not criminals. And then they look at people who are criminals and they're like, oh, it's those types of people that are the criminals. And people like us would never do that. So yeah, I agree with everything you just said, and also, I mean, it does glorify police work, and I'm like you. I am not 100% anti-police. You know, I am someone who desperately feels there needs to be massive police reform. Police brutality, racial inequality in policing, all sorts of serious problems. And as much as I am a fan, as I said a few questions ago, I'm a big fan of the show NYPD Blue. But that show and shows like that, even though NYPD Blue is not as much of a love song to cops as some other shows have been, it is still largely that. And shows like that at least need to be balanced out by other more critical portrayals in our culture so that we don't keep getting this same message over and over again about, oh, cops are so brave. Cops are the thin blue line between civilization and chaos. Cops deserve your respect. Cops deserve your love. Don't be critical of cops, blah, 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 blah. That's counterproductive to the kind of society I think we should want to have. And it's counterproductive to police reform, which is urgently needed on many different levels. So that's a problem with it too. And, you know, to tie it in with another question that I answered a minute ago, one of the things that I have always appreciated about the Sherlock Holmes stories is that most of the criminals in the Sherlock Holmes stories come from the upper classes. There aren't that many Sherlock Holmes stories where the bad guy turns out to be a poor person. And in fact, there's one of the short stories, I can't remember which one it is. It might be The Problem at Thor Bridge or the Boscombe Valley Mystery, but it's one of the ones where Holmes travels out to the country to an estate to investigate a crime. And he says, or the Abbey Grange maybe. I can't think of which one it is, and he's on the train ride out to the country with Watson. And Watson makes some appreciative remark of the beautiful old farmhouses out on these country estates, you know. And Holmes says, I would much rather be in London. I would much rather be in the city, because when people get out here by themselves in the country, there's no one to stop them from doing any number of evil things. And of course, people who lived out on those big wealthy estates, those were upper class people. And Holmes was very aware in the stories of how upper class people, wealthy people, aristocratic people were just as capable of being criminals as people of lower economic classes. And they had the means to do much more dastardly things and much more destructive, far-reaching things and when they turned to crime than poor people did. So I always appreciated that about Sherlock Holmes, that it made you very aware that criminality was not a trait of poor people. It could be a trait of anybody. Next question is from M. Greenwood. Hey, Steve, I hope you're having a great week. My question this time relates to activism. I have to leave for work at 5:30 a.m., don't usually get home until 5 p.m., and have a disabled family member who is unable to work. Needless to say, my life is really busy and our budget is really tight. I want to do something to keep the groups targeted by the current, to help the groups targeted by the current administration, but I really don't know what to do since the two things most people have to give, time and money, are in short supply for myself and my family. Do you have any suggestions of small, quick things people who want to be involved in activism can do without wearing themselves out or putting themselves in a bad place financially? Thanks, M. Greenwood. Well, I mean, one of the easiest things to do would be to get involved using social media. I mean, sometimes that gets a bad rap, and that is characterized as slacktivism, or as people just, posting things on social media so they can make themselves feel better. But if you are in a situation where you can't really afford to donate money and you're too busy to donate time, but you really want to help, using whatever platform you have on social media, using your Twitter or your Facebook, or if you have a YouTube channel or a blog or whatever, using that platform to speak out about things that matter to you or to share articles about things that matter to you is a legitimate form of activism. I think that can help, especially if that's the best way that you can put your energy to use. You can do the same thing on a person-to-person basis. I think if you have the time and the ability to read some articles, to educate yourself, to keep up on the issues that you care about, and then you can be a resource to other people in your life. If something comes up in a conversation and you can correct a misconception or a mistake that somebody makes, or educate someone who shows an interest in a particular issue that you think is important, then you can do that too. I mean, there are all kinds of little things that you can do that don't take a lot of time or a lot of money. And the most important thing you've already done, which is you care. You're interested. You want to make a difference. And I feel like if you start with that, and you keep that interest, and you say, I may not be able to do much, but I really want to do something, then you will find a way to do something when you are able, in whatever form you're able. The important thing is just to watch, to look for things that you can do, to make a difference, because you know your life and you know your limitations better than anybody. And so you know what forms of activism and what forms of helping can fit in to your particular circumstance. Next question is from Grumpy Otter. I have a small request about your videos. I'll throw it right out there, then explain why. Could you remove the background music from your videos? This is not simply a request because of an aesthetic preference. I ask because I suffer from a brain disorder that causes extraneous sounds to flare to the forefront of my consciousness. For example, I will be watching one of your videos, enjoying what you have to say, and suddenly my brain will focus on the background music and shriek, "What is that? Is it important? Do I need to pay attention to it?" And then by the time I can redirect my brain back to what you are saying, I've missed several of your points, and it takes time to get refocused on what you are saying. I think you have a lovely voice, and you speak quickly usually, unless being silent to make a point, so that you don't really need background filler to make good videos, I don't think. I very much enjoy your videos and thought perhaps you'd consider this a bit of constructive criticism. You might simply try removing the background music for one or two videos and see how it goes. I imagine you might have more fans than I who would find it helpful. Yeah, I think I know that I think you have mentioned it before, and I know maybe one or two other people have mentioned it before as well. And someone, I can't remember who it was, made a really good suggestion that I think I'm going to try to do from now on, because I'll explain after I tell you what it is. The main videos that I use background music in are the Facepalm 5 videos. And I think what I could do, and what I might try to start doing in the future, is to release two versions of the video. I could release a version that is just as I usually do it with background music, because that is an aesthetic preference for me. Like I just think those videos, especially now that it's just me and my voice, like I'm not on camera for most of it, I think the background music helps and just makes it, for me, and I think for a lot of other people, just makes it a better video. But what I can do is I can release the regular version with the background music, but I can also export a version without background music and just upload that as unlisted and put a link to that in the description of the main video, so that anybody who wants a version without background music can go and watch that. Because now that I've got my new computer and it doesn't take all damn night to export a video. And in the case of the Facepalm 5 videos, I mean, it's given how accustomed I am to it taking hours and hours to export a video, it's like a couple of minutes. It's shockingly quick. So I could run off two versions of the same video, one with the background music and one without the background music, and just upload them both and give people the option. So I might try that, because I am sensitive to your request, and I completely get it, and I don't take it as a frivolous request at all. So I might try to do that from now on, and we'll see how it goes. So thank you very much for the criticism. Next is a question from Neo Normie. Yes, I have working class knees. Have you considered doing a cooking show, trying food from around the globe like Welsh cheese on toast, English cottage pie, also available with vegetarian options, French desserts, German beers, Belgian cheddar balls with dark chocolate? I think I might just eat all that stuff just to eat it. Like, why do I need to make videos about it? I would just like to try it. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, that doesn't really seem like the kind of thing I do. Like, this channel is very eclectic, and that's one of the things I like about my YouTube channel, is that it is extremely eclectic. It's so eclectic that occasionally I still get people saying, well, why don't you just make this series its own channel? And I feel like if I did that, it would lose part of the point of this channel. Like, I like the fact that I do Star Trek videos and political videos and stuffed animal funny videos and satirical religious videos where I wear a wig and pretend to be a far right traditionalist Catholic asshole, and I do like personal essays. It's it's a cornucopia, and I like that. But I don't know if food tasting videos would fit in, and it's just not something that I don't have a personal interest in doing that kind of video. I've watched, like, last week, a friend of mine suggested those videos where Irish people try food, and I was very charmed by those. Like, I really, really like those. But I don't think that's the kind of video I want to make. So I appreciate the suggestion, and I might try some of the food just to try the food. But I don't think I'm not planning on making those kind of videos on this channel. I just don't think that's where my interest lies or where my skill set would be best put to use. But I appreciate the suggestion. John Burnsy. Hey, Steve, I'm curious if you've seen a game called This War of Mine. It's different from most video games. I believe it's based on the Yugoslavian Civil War, but there's been plenty of stories from many countries hosting internecine actions that they could base this game on many civil wars. You control usually a few survivors, some are children, and the goal is simply to survive. I know there are players who are able to amass weapons and attack places with armed people in them, but again, the ability to avoid contact while getting resources is more important than going full Rambo in most, if not all, situations. The other part of this is that occasionally a man will come by your shelter to trade. And this is kind of the funny part of the game. If you don't have a firearm, bullets that you might find while scavenging are best traded away. Without a gun, they're useless, but a shovel or crowbar, or best of all, a hatchet, are very valuable. That's not to say that picking up some guns or building them along the way doesn't hurt your home defense. Each of the characters that you end up playing have different skills. Choosing who is best to scavenge while others stay home and build or cook are one of the many choices you make. Also, the company that created the game also made 3 stories that are also playable. Check it out, you might like it. You can also donate funds for war orphans as well. P.S. How hard would it be for you to do an animated version of the Ensign's log? I'm thinking it would be very easy. What do you think? I have not played that game, so I can't speak to that. I don't really know any more about it than what you've just told me. And I don't think I've ever even heard of it, to be honest. But, it sounds like an interesting game. I don't know if I would play it. The only Civil War game that I've ever played and been interested in, and I only think of it now because I got my Retro Pi last week, my Raspberry Pi filled, packed with 15,000 video games, and I've been playing it in my off time the last week or so and loving it. It has an old NES game on there called North and South, which is an American Civil War game, and I would like to play that more often because I played that a lot when I was a kid. But no, I've never played that game. But it sounds interesting. I don't know. I'm probably not going to check it out. Just to let you know, I'm not necessarily looking to take up even more of my time playing video games. My schedule is fairly packed as it is, and I think the Retro Pie will probably take care of a lot of the leisure time just by itself. And as for the Ensign's Log being animated, that sounds like a fan series with a visual element, and those are no longer allowed, except in 15-minute intervals with a maximum of 30 total minutes. Those are the rules that CBS has laid out for fan productions. So the rules do not apply to audio productions. So far, so good as far as the Ensign's Log being a podcast. We try to be cute about it, and we try to pitch it as satire and as parody, and I think it qualifies as that. And we don't lean super hard on the Star Trek angle. Like, it's obviously set in the Star Trek universe, but we're not trying to convince people that it's a legitimate Star Trek show or piggyback too much on the Star Trek intellectual property. So I think we could get away with it. But if we made it an animated series, that's it. Like that's a fan production, and it's a fan video production, and they just don't want people to do that. So we couldn't do that. And I don't think it's with me. It is not within the financial means or the technical means or the creative means of either myself or Jason, I don't think, to do that. So no, there will be no Ensign's Log animated series happening anytime soon, unless we get hired by CBS to just do it. If CBS wants to throw a bunch of money at us and say make an official Star Trek animated series based on the Ensign's Log, then I'm sure we would go for that. I can't speak for Jason 100%, but I'm pretty sure he would be interested in doing that. But until that happens, no, there will be no Ensign's Log animated series. Next question is from Jin Hai. Picard said that in utopian Trek Earth, we work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity. Jake Sisko repeated it to a skeptical Nog, who was like, dude, what does that even mean exactly? You talked recently about the normalization of apathy. In my career in the American workforce, I see a normalization of laziness and lack of responsibility among the vast majority of workers who have good health care and good quality of life. Most humans seem spoiled and don't really seem to want to do their best. They treat work like an annoying distraction and try to make it as stress-free as possible. I sometimes get apathetic because our end goal seems to be to uplift everyone so they have the opportunity to comfortably do the bare minimum. If we were to have a President Shives, Speaker Shives, Majority Leader Shives, and Chief Justice Shives, and human suffering was at least systemically on its way to being cured, and use this as a metaphor for Trektopian Earth, then what would be your answer to Nog's question? Well, I think something to keep in mind when we compare the way that human society looks in Star Trek to the way human society looks to us in the real world. Most people who work today are working at jobs that they would not have chosen if not for the pay, the benefits, something like that. Most people are not able to work at something that is their life's passion. And I think that contributes a lot to the laziness, to the wanting to do the bare minimum, to the lack of engagement that people have in their work. It's not so much that people are lazy in the sense that they don't want to work or they're unwilling to work or they're unable to work. I think a lot of it is a lack of motivation because people are doing work that doesn't really mean anything to them. They just have to do it in order to get paid so they can pay their bills and have a roof over their head and buy food and clothes and take care of their family. If we were in a situation where people had their basic needs met and they could focus their energies and do their work on things that actually meant something to them, I don't think that apathy and that laziness would be as much of a problem. I don't think it would be nearly as much of a problem. So I think that's the real issue. And if we were living in a Trektopian-like society where people had at least a higher ground floor than they have now, if there was some kind of basic income that people could have that would take care of their essential needs so that people could work and choose jobs that they wanted to do rather than jobs that they had to do in order to stay alive, then I think people would be better able to do work that gives their life meaning. Because I think that's what they're getting at. When Picard and Jake say we work to better ourselves and the rest of humanity, it means doing work that means something to you, whatever it is. whatever kind of work it is, if it's artwork, if it's construction work, if it's working in the field, if it's being a farmer, if it's being a mechanic, I mean, whatever, right? It's work that you feel drawn to personally, that gives your life meaning, that you think you're good at, or you think you can contribute something to it, or contribute something to the world through doing that work. That's what it means. And if people had the financial freedom to do that work, then I don't think laziness and lack of motivation would be serious problems. Next question is from Spyro Smithy. Hey, Steve, simple question. What's your top favorite episodes of Deep Space Nine? Oh, a deceptively simple question, because as most people who watch my videos know by now, Deep Space Nine is my favorite Star Trek show. So it's hard to choose my favorite. I mean, my very, very favorite episode is The Visitor, because that's my favorite episode of any Star Trek show ever. Not just my favorite DS9, but my favorite Star Trek, period. So that's easy. After that, it gets a little crowded. I really love Far Beyond the Stars. I really love Trials and Tribulations. I really love the past tense two-parter. I think that's fantastic. I love Duet. I love Dramatis Personae, which is an episode a lot of people don't like because it's very silly, but I love Dramatis Personae. I love watching Avery Brooks overact his ass off, and he does it throughout that episode. I love It's Only a Paper Moon, the episode that shows Nog dealing with the aftermath of losing his leg. I love the episode where Nog gets injured and has to lose his leg, which I think is the Siege of AR something. I don't know. I can't remember. I love The Ship. So that's a general sampling of Deep Space Nine episodes that I love. I love a lot of Deep Space Nine episodes. And those ones I just named off the top of my head have got to be my favorites. Next question is from Joe McClory. So I was watching the new Netflix Dark Crystal show. Great if you haven't seen, and if you have and have the time, what did you think? And much like the movie, there is a not subtle analogy to the powerful feeding off the less powerful. But I was wondering if you thought if the rich really could extend their lives into immortality by feeding off the poor and the land, if there would be enough resistance to stop them. Note that I have not asked if the rich would literally do it, as well, duh, they figuratively do it, and statistically they don't even increase their length of life or happiness much over someone who is making $75K a year. I mean, you would like to think that there would be enough resistance to stop people from doing it, but I mean, that's probably giving us too much credit. That's probably giving, I mean, because I feel like if the rich started to literally do that, and by the way, no, I haven't seen the Dark Crystal series, so I haven't seen it yet. If the rich started to literally feed off of the poor to extend their lives, they would find some way to frame it so that it benefited the poor. And they would have to, and they would make that stick to enough people that there would be fewer people who would want to rebel than you would think would in that situation. So you'd have to win the propaganda war as well as win the actual fight against rich people doing this to poor people. So, but I mean, it would be nice to think there would be enough people who would gather a resistance and stop it from happening. But I mean, human history is full of examples of how that didn't happen. Or it didn't happen until it was too late. I mean, you would like to think that there would have been enough people to stop the Nazis from coming to power, but that didn't happen until after the Nazis had been in power for many years and had started the worst war in human history. And then it happened. Then people were like, oh shit, we should do something about these Nazis, but it didn't happen until then. So I would like to think there would be a resistance, enough of a resistance to stop it, but I don't know. Next question is from some random geek. I have a whole question almost ready, but then one of your other patrons mentioned something that causes me to go, no, someone is perpetuating a big capitalist myth. I have to counter this dangerous narrative. So I am going to talk about laziness, or more accurately, laziness. What is laziness? What are people talking about when they talk about laziness? Because I came across this Medium article by Devin Price, where it said where is say that laziness does not exist, but hidden barriers do. Here is the article, and there's a link, and I'll put that in the description after the show. Devon is a social psychologist and is a professor of psychology, and whenever they investigate why their students are doing poorly, it is because of untreated depression, anxiety, or any number of different physical and or mental illnesses. On top of doing a full student workload and working a part-time or full-time job just to survive under later stage neoliberal capitalism. And yet, they get branded as lazy. Hell, Joanna in Phoenix would love to find work, but they can't find accessible work. Or the work they find is unhealthy for their physical health or mental health. It is extremely tough to work a fast food job, as this Vox article points out here. And there's another article that I will link in the description after the show. And yet, those who are often some of the lowest paying jobs there is. But apparently one needs a job in order to live, or more accurately, one needs 2 or 3 jobs, or a full-time and drive an Uber in evenings and weekends. And because Joanna and Phoenix can't find work that is accommodating to their situations and conditions, capitalism is an extremely ableist system. They have to beg online in order to live. Please share around the charity links below and give if you can. If you can do more to help, please do. This laziness seems to come from this cult of work that Renegade Cut recently talks about in his latest video essay here. And there's another link that I'll add. It also seems to be a generational gap, too. Baby boomers and old Gen Xers don't realize the extremely fortunate time period they grew up in that allows them to have a house at the when they did, allowing them to more easily handle rising housing prices and recessions. We're coming up to another one. Sucks for millennials like me, Joanna, and Phoenix, who rent, and that goes up every year. Tristan Johnson of Step Back History covers that topic in his video, Why Baby Boomers Don't Get Millennials. Here, and there's another link I'll add. I will stop there before I ramble on too long. So what is laziness and the problem of procrastination and lack of motivation? Good luck to all of my comrades out there. Protest for climate strike. We must end capitalism to stop climate change. Yeah, I think I kind of covered that in my answer to Jin's question about, I think that I didn't cover the that it might be depression or undiagnosed mental illness of some kind, which I think is also something as a valid thing to point out. But I think if people were able to do work that meant something to them more often, then I don't think what we call, or what some people call, laziness would be as much of a problem. I don't think that would be as big of an issue. Next question is from Matthew Datcher. Steve, who is your stuffed friend next to the Shatner photo? And how did they manage to avoid being in a Steve and Stuffy video? Or were they? The friend that Matthew is referring to, I'll get her down here. This is Eustacia. This is Eustacia Vi is her name. As with most of the other animals in Steve and Stuffy, she was named by my wife. And yes, Eustacia has never been in a Steve and Stuffy video. I don't know if she ever will be. She might be. I have an idea maybe for a gag where, because she's been on camera in Stuffy videos before. Like we've seen her in Stuffy scenes set in this room. We've seen her in the background or in shots, but she's never spoken a word. She's never done anything. So I have an idea for how we could bring her in and explain what she's been doing up there this whole time. But no, she's never been featured in a Steve and Stuffy video. And there you go, Eustacia. And the main reason for that is I just didn't think about it. Like she lives up here. There, now I'm going to be like preoccupied with putting her back the way she was. There. She lives up there, and that's where she lives, and that's just where she's always sort of been. So I never really thought about putting her in a Stuffy video, but I do have a concept for how I could bring her in if I wanted to. So who knows? Maybe someday. Next question, final question actually, from General Contact Unit Problem Child. A lot of Star Trek episodes revolve around the ship getting into trouble because someone inadvertently violated a bizarre local law. 1, is it negligent for them to beam down without researching all local laws? 2, Is it reasonable to say Starfleet ships have to obey local laws no matter how arbitrary or capricious they are? I mean, what if a Starfleet ship is just passing by the edge of a solar system and locals contact them and say, "Oh, you just flew within a light minute of our favorite outlying dwarf planet. That means life in prison." Should they have to go along with that? I guess not. I mean, I don't think that's realistic. But you have actually hit on one of the basic fundamental flaws with the premise of Star Trek. And again, this is one of those, just say to yourself, it's just a show, I should really just relax things. The creed of Star Trek, as presented in the opening voiceover to Classic Trek and TNG, is to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before. So it's supposed to be exploration. It's supposed to be going out and discovering new places. The problem is, most of the places they go already have people living there. And at some point, after the first Star Trek series aired, people started to realize, oh shit, that's what European explorers did during the Age of Discovery. And we landed, or Europeans, our European ancestors landed in places that already had populations, and they committed genocide against them. They enslaved them. They forcibly relocated them. They did all kinds of terrible things. So maybe just going out into territory that is unexplored for us, but home for someone else, isn't such a great idea. So they kind of adjusted that in the TNG era, and they still did exploring, and they still went out and found new civilizations that they hadn't found before, but they stuck to a much stricter form of the Prime Directive, and they introduced very involved, very careful first contact procedures. And I think that's all very good, but it cuts against the, explore strange new worlds ethos, because that doesn't really make sense. If you want to be ethical about space exploration in a galaxy filled with people, you can't just say, get in a ship, go out and meet new people. Like you have to do the kinds of things that you mentioned in your question. You have to research local customs, local laws, right? You have to make first contact in a way that is respectful of people who live there, right? You can't just show up. So yeah, I think you are responsible for obeying their laws and for knowing what the laws are. And if they have laws that you think you can't obey, or that you think would cause a lot of trouble for your Starfleet crew, then you just can't go. You have to just steer clear. So the best solution will be like, if you go to that system where they have a law that says if you come within a light minute of their favorite dwarf planet, you get the death penalty, then you just give those folks a wide berth, right? You just avoid that issue altogether, But yeah, I think that it is negligent for them to just show up someplace without researching the local customs as much as they can. So that was the last patron question. I will now turn to the live chat. So if anybody is in the live chat and has some questions, I will spend the next 20 minutes or so to answer questions in the live chat. So let's see what we have. Tom McDonald says, I've sinned. I slept through most of the Patreon questions. Can you recap them and your answers for me? No. Plasma Burn Depth, Steve for Top 5 second release version, Go Classic. Some of us miss seeing your facial reactions as you went through the stories. Less music and more flipping the bird makes sense. Please keep resisting. I've toyed with the idea of going back on camera for Facepalm 5 a little bit, because I do think it loses something if I'm not on camera, in all modesty. So I don't know. We'll see. I just got a super chat from John Burns. Thank you, John. And it says, the Russians won Trump the presidency, so he's a Russian puppet in 2021. Now what? Now what if Wayne Messam wins the White House in 2020? Does that mean he's a Russian puppet as well? DNC equals Russian free? Yeah, probably not. I mean, I'm sure there's some undue influence, or at least some attempted undue influence in the DNC as well. But again, it's a matter of who would you rather, what would be your preference, Some random geek says, Steve, question, why do you want someone, just one person, to have the power to govern the world? Why are you fine with having an authoritarian power over you? I don't think that the president of the world government should be a dictator. I think I would be okay with like a prime minister or an executive. I don't think they should have like a great deal of authority over individual people's lives. But I do like the idea of there being a kind of global governing body, if for no other reason than to keep order and to resolve conflicts peacefully. Maybe something like a slightly more legally binding form of the United Nations. But no, I don't think it should be. I don't think one person should have the power individually to govern the world. Secular Scholar, considering how much of a Trekkie you are, would you collect the Trek video games, role-playing games, tabletop games, encyclopedias, and other such paraphernalia to dive into the lore deeper? I don't have any of the role-playing games or tabletop games because that just doesn't interest me. I had an original copy like of the first Star Trek encyclopedia that came out when I was in like 8th grade, I think. I still have that somewhere. And I have a few of the video games, but other than that, not a whole lot. So I guess I'm not that interested in the lore. Here's another one from John Burns. I wasn't asking about preferences. I was asking about the political system being cleansed. How can that be done? Well, campaign finance reform would be good. Stricter oversight of who is donating what to who, electing honest people. That's funny. Let me see. Some random geek also asks, what would cause you to lose faith in representative democracy and go with one form or another of direct democracy or liquid democracy? I don't know. See, I would lose faith in I lose faith in people. I think representative democracy is a system that can work and that does work sometimes. I think the problem is the way it's executed. I think the problem is the people that do it. As I believe I've said before, I think on paper it's a solid system. So I don't see anything I don't see a better system. I don't think direct democracy is a better system for a large population than representative democracy. So I'm sticking with representative democracy until I hear a better idea. I think when it fails because the people who are in charge of carrying it out fail. Jim Baker says, what's your favorite TNG episode? Mine is Cause and Effect, where they get caught in the time loop. That is such a good episode. And that's one of the most rewatchable episodes for me. My favorite, I really like the Chain of Command two-parter, especially part 2, where it's mostly a two-hander between Patrick Stewart and David Warner. And it has some good Ronnie Cox, Captain Jellicoe stuff in it too. But I really like Chain of Command. I really like Tapestry. The episode where Captain Picard dies and Q is God and he quantum leaps him back into himself as a recently graduated ensign, and he gets to relive a few days of his life and try to avoid being stabbed by a Nausicaan in a bar fight. So yeah, probably either Cause and Effect or Tapestry. Pedro Noguera, what movies, series, cartoons do you recommend me to show my daughter Luna? She's a newborn, but I want to find shows with good values and entertainment value, besides Star Trek, of course. I mean, I can't really come up with anything better than Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, I know it's on Amazon Prime. I think they still show it on PBS from time to time in some form or another. I mean, to me, Mr. Rogers is the best kids show ever. Here's another one, a super chat from David Colby. Steve, answer me honestly and true. Is it actually okay for me to shill my... It is actually okay for me to shill my books, right? I am filled with guilt and nervousness every time I do it. Absolutely. Shill away. I'm happy to promote your books for you. You've been a really great viewer and patron, and I'm happy to let people know about your book. So please, don't feel guilty about that. Phoenix Espresso, Steve, 2 weeks ago, Essence of Thought viciously harassed and bullied Rachel Oates so much that she cut herself and burst into tears on camera. Any thoughts on this? I heard a little bit about this, but I'm not super familiar with it. So, I mean, obviously I would not, if I like Essence of Thought. I don't know exactly what the situation is. If I had caused someone to cut themselves and to burst into tears, I would feel really bad about that. But I don't know Rachel, I don't know if I even know who Rachel is. I don't know. I know nothing about that situation. Because people would probably be shocked by how much I don't pay attention to YouTube stuff. But yeah, if it was me, I would feel really bad about making somebody cry or making somebody cut themselves. I would not be proud of myself for that. But I don't know what the situation was. I don't know what Essence of Thought was thinking or saying or whatever. So I can't really speak. But it doesn't sound good. Harley Baker, what is your opinion on the Navy's confirmation of UFOs as seen in fighter jet recordings? It was unnerving to hear a highly trained pilot completely unsure of what they're seeing. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's sort of a situation where it's like, we have to be mindful of the fact that UFO does not mean alien spacecraft. Like, I'm still not someone who believes that there are alien spacecraft out there. But yeah, of course, if you hear a trained professional pilot say, "What the hell is that?" Yeah, it doesn't fill you with confidence, does it? Simple Simon Speaks. Can you do a video on fractional reserve banking? As soon as I figure out what that is, I would love to. There's probably other people who can do that better than me. People who are aware of what that is, for instance. Some random geek. Why can't people resolve their conflicts by themselves? Well, they can. That's one of the reasons why they form governments. Super Russell James, how do you maintain relationships with people that have polar opposite beliefs, religion and politics? Well, I mean, it depends on the particular beliefs as to whether or not I want to maintain relationships with those people. Here's a super chat from John Burns who says, "Hey, Steve, some random geek doesn't like capitalism, but as long as we're stuck with capitalism, I'm going to donate $5 to help promote David Colby's books. Reading is good." Well, there you go. That's making the best of a shitty situation, Yeah, capitalism is a shit sandwich, but we can at least put some delicious sauce on it to kind of help it taste a little better. But yeah, as for Russell and maintaining relationships, in situations where you want to maintain the relationship, I think in many cases the best way is to just avoid talking about the thing that is the point of contention between you. John Burns says, "I think the problem with all representative democracies' failures is that the parties have too much power. When the party decides who's better based on enriching the parties, as just said." Yeah, I mean, George Washington warned against empowering political parties too much in his farewell address, and we see how well that turned out. Some Random Geek is plugging his Social Justice Alchemy show with John Brockman, Tom McDonald, Jamie J, and Leto Anor. The link is there in the chat. It is tomorrow at 6 p.m. UTC, 2 p.m. EST, so everybody be sure to check that out. Some Random Geek also says, if UBI is put in like $1,000 a month, what is to prevent landlords to raise their rent prices since the tenants now receive more money per month? I say get rid of landlords. I mean, I would be fine with getting rid of landlords, or at least with imposing some kind of regulation to try and prevent landlords from just arbitrarily raising the rent if something like universal income became a reality. Sean Hartley, do humans naturally tend toward bettering humankind? Do we only try to improve ourselves because of the specific history we have? I feel like it's simplistic to say that humans naturally tend to do one thing or the other, because I feel like we naturally tend to better ourselves and we also naturally tend to destroy ourselves. Like, I feel like those are both parts of human nature. But yeah, I do think historical events and present circumstances have a lot to say about whether or not we are trying to improve ourselves, or how much energy we are putting towards self-improvement versus something more destructive. Music cassette about the better idea than representative democracy. The question before mentioned liquid democracy. I think we did not hear your thoughts on that. I am not familiar with liquid democracy, so I can't say what I think about it because I don't know what it is. Pedro says, as a Brazilian, I have never watched Mr. Rogers, even though I have seen the movie about him. I will check that out. Thank you for me and Baby Luna. Well, you're welcome. Yeah, you know what? That's just my American centric assumptions. I assume that because I grew up with Mr. Rogers that everybody did or everybody's familiar with it. So if it is available to you in Brazil, then I would highly recommend it. I'm sorry I couldn't recommend a show that you would be more familiar with. And if you do check it out, I hope that you and Baby Luna enjoy it. Plasma Burn Death, Steve, The Crucible, John Proctor. Your thoughts on us only having our name and history judgment. GOP selling souls on earth, but Judgment Day is infinite. Digital evidence judged by God or history. Great scene for Daniel Day-Lewis in the movie, right? When he's like, but it is my name! Like, oh, come on. God damn it, what a great scene. Daniel Day-Lewis. Fine actor. I do think maybe, speaking of one of the other questions, like, what do we only work to help other people or to improve ourselves because of historical events? I mean, I think if we were more mindful of how future generations would look upon us, we would probably be better people. Some random geek says, I think the Middle East should be allowed to vote in U.S. elections since they are just as much affected by the results as anyone else. That's why I say there should be some kind of global government so that there would be an authority, a legal governmental authority that people could appeal to. So when the U.S., as it often does, is acting like a huge asshole, there would be a higher authority to appeal to. So other people in other parts of the world who do have a vote and a voice in that body could say, hey, tell the United States to knock it off, and they would have the power to intervene and do something. Seal 0626 says Sherlock Holmes was an unironic SJW. Agreed. I think in many ways, judged by the standards of his time, I think he was. Yes, I think he's problematic in many ways, judged by our standards, especially his attitudes toward women, but in many ways, I think Holmes was very socially progressive. Yes. Another super chat from John Burns. Thank you again for your generosity, my friend. In the great movie The Big Short, there's a scene of some investors of a new short scheme are looking around a housing complex. You find out that even landlords got screwed by the banks in 2007. Oh yeah, a lot of people got screwed by the banks in 2007 for sure. There are a lot of landlords who aren't necessarily super rich. It doesn't excuse them if they're exploiting their tenants or if they're doing bad things or wrong things. But yeah, not all landlords are necessarily like super rich people. And Pedro says, will you ever go back to reviewing old horror movies? Yes, I would like to. Yes, I don't know if I will this year or not, but if I had time, I would love to. I would love to go to do another classic monster movie week and review old horror movies. John Brockman, fully automated luxury gay space communism. That sounds like Star Trek. So yes, I would go for that. I just made a video where I said it's not necessarily communist, but fuck it, we'll just use a more casual definition. Yeah, that sounds fine. And then Seal 0626 also says, I know you don't like musicals, but please give the last track, the final scene from Sunset Boulevard, a listen. It's so incredibly evocative and I think really pretty true to the source. I'll check it out. I love the movie, like the original Sunset Boulevard. The film is one of my very favorite films, but I have never seen the musical. John Brockman says, are you quaking in your boots in anticipation of my revenge? I am quaking in my socks, John. I don't have my boots on at the moment. See, I'm quaking in I'm quaking in my socks. Why did I do that? I could have lifted this leg. Why did I? Yeah, there. See? There. I'm quaking in my socks. My Hanes socks. My Hanes brand socks. Brand loyalty is very important in a commercialized capitalist society. Sean Hartley says, I've been struggling to tell my loved ones that I have a terminal disease. Telling people over the internet just seems so much easier. How can I tell them without cowering at the last moment? First of all, I'm really, really sorry to hear that, Sean. I don't think I knew that. So I'm very sorry to hear that you have a disease, a terminal disease. That's terrible. I don't know. I'm someone who I am prone to chickening out. Like, I am the type of person that would rather write an email than call someone or go to see someone in person. Like, I am very prone to, walking right up to the door and then turning around and leaving and going like, I can't fucking do it. Right. So I completely sympathize. I mean, I feel like the best way is to just do it fast enough that you don't have time to talk yourself out of it. Commit to it in a way that you can't back out of, because you're going to want to back out, and just get it over with. That's how I do it. Right. So yeah. Holmes was totally in favor of miscegenation. Yes. Yeah. The fucking SJW. Tiberian Gray, do I have to pay to ask you for your thoughts, Steve? No, absolutely not. You just asked me my thoughts just now. The way this works is I answer questions from patrons in the first part of the show, and then for the final portion of the show, however much time is left after I get through all the patron questions, I take questions from the live chat, and if I see your question, I try to answer it. I don't always see everybody's question, but it's not anything personal. If I skip one of John Brockman's questions, it's totally personal, but most of the time, if you ask a question in the live chat and I don't answer it, it's because I just honestly didn't see it or didn't have time to get to it. Another live chat from John Burns. Again, thank you very much. I know it doesn't excuse them, but many wealthy people didn't see the collapse coming, and making landlords evil isn't fair, certainly when the banks were given legalistic passes. I see with the landlord thing, I tend to view it in terms of the system, not in terms of the individuals. Like there's an exploitative system in place. My landlord, the person I pay my rent to, I think I've never had any problems with at all. And I think is a good landlord. I don't have, and I would not wish any harm on that person. Would I rather have a system in place where the position of landlord didn't exist or didn't have as much power to ruin people's lives as it does now? Yes, I absolutely would. But I don't blame my landlord personally for that. I blame the system for that. And I would like to see that system reformed or replaced. Jemshin says, Steve, thank you for finally convincing me to watch the Star Trek animated series. I'm only a few episodes in so far and loving it. Oh, awesome. I'm really glad that you're watching it, and I'm glad you like it. I've always liked the animated series as well, as you know from watching that video. Phoenix Espresso says the essence of thought was unfairly hounding Rachel Oates simply for being a close friend of Rationality Rules, although she's never defended any of his arguments. Okay, I mean, any of his arguments on trans athletes, it was simply a case of guilt by association. Rachel has a whole Google Doc pinned on her Twitter going through everything EOT said about her and why she was hurt. Yeah, like I said, I don't know about it. I know that EOT has taken the Rationality Rules affair very seriously and very personally, and I don't begrudge them that at all. But if Rachel was a relatively innocent bystander who was hurt as a result of that, then I can't get behind that. I think that was wrong. Although I do question, if she's friends with Rationality Rules, I guess that's her business. But it doesn't necessarily make me think all that well of her. Pedro says, what Star Trek alien race am I part of? Honestly, I just want to be a human. The other Star Trek races, they all have their ups and downs, and they all have things that I like about them and things that I would not want to be. But, I would like to be a human in the Star Trek world. Or a Q. If I could be a Q, that would be great. Dare Alt Trekkie says, "How are you today? I gotta admit, I love Star Trek Voyager, but I can understand when people dislike it." Yeah, I mean, I look, I've made it clear that Voyager is my least favorite Star Trek, but I don't begrudge anybody liking it. Like and it has its moments, and there are times when I want to watch Voyager. Like I like Voyager, I like certain episodes. There are times when it feels good to turn on an episode of Star Trek Voyager and just turn off my brain because I'm not going to need it anyway. Um, um, some random geek says, "Why must a centralized government rule over vast amounts of people?" Um, when you get to the stage of a government, the government being that big, like the world government we've been talking about, I don't necessarily look at it as ruling over individual people. I look at it as a governing body that interacts primarily with other smaller bodies, smaller governments. You know what I mean? So like the global government would interact with the governments of sovereign states, much like the American federal government interacts with state governments. And it would set ground rules that everybody has to sort of play by, and it would provide a place of last resort to appeal to. If problems couldn't be resolved at lower levels. That's how I look at it. I don't look at it as, a centralized government putting down its fist and having unquestionable authority to people. I feel like the authority should be rooted in democracy, should be rooted in a rule of law, should be accountable, should be able to be changed, should be able to be recalled or impeached or subjected to frequent elections. I think that it shouldn't just be a static, unquestionable authority. And some random geek also says, "Can't tenants unions do all the work that landlords are supposed to do in our current system? Why do we have landlords?" Well, if you have a better idea than landlords, I think that's fine. As I said, I don't have any personal animus toward my landlord. I think that the system that we have now that enables people to be landlords or allows people to be landlords and maybe incentivizes people to be landlords in certain ways, I think that's the problem. And if we could replace landlords with tenant associations, I think I would have no problem with that. And I don't know, my landlord might not have a problem with that either. Trietial, I think I'm pronouncing that somewhat correctly. "Are there other science fiction shows you might delve into in the future?" I'm probably going to do some videos on Quantum Leap at some point because I'm watching that now. I just got Quantum Leap. I just got the whole series on Blu-ray and I'm going through that now. So I'm probably going to do some Quantum Leap videos at some point in the future. Juan Reinberg Cortez, "Hey, I love the Ensign's Log. Do you guys see yourselves doing something similar for TNG when you cover all the adventures of a certain 5-year mission?" Yes, we are definitely moving on to TNG after we get through TOS. That's a given. John Burns says, "Would you be a speciesist or a non-speciesist? And how would you know if you were a human in Star Trek? What's wrong with being evil?" I feel like you would know. I feel like people would be able to tell. People can usually tell, what species they are. I would like to think I would not be a speciesist. No. Because that's like the Star Trek equivalent of racism. I mean, it is racism. Sean Hartley says, "Do you agree with Arthur C. Clarke's premise that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic in regards to aliens being what people perceive as God?" I don't think that's the explanation for belief in God, but yes, I agree with that general idea. John Burns says, "There's a 25-year waiting period to get a house in Saudi Arabia. Rent must be a beach." Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, Floyd says Babylon 5. Yeah, I would have to watch Babylon 5 again because I haven't watched any of it since it was originally on the air. But yeah, I can see possibly doing Babylon 5 videos in the future. And Stargate, yeah, Stargate SG-1, because someone else mentioned Stargate SG-1 to me as well, and I'm a huge Richard Dean Anderson mark from MacGyver, so I would love to watch Stargate, and I just never have. John Brogman says, is Picard a boobs or an ass man? Yes, I think he is. Should the dyslexic of the world untied? That's funny, but I feel bad laughing at that because I'm not dyslexic. Jim Baker says, how about The West Wing or House MD? Both shows great enough to make several videos on. Have you seen them? Willing to comment? Yes, I've seen every episode of House. I've seen most of The West Wing. I could see doing videos about both of those shows at some point. Yeah, I'm good. Like I said, I'm going to do a series on NYPD Blue as soon as I get done watching all of it. And if that goes well in terms of creatively, if it turns out to be a good show, and if people like it and watch it, I would definitely see doing similar projects about different shows for sure. Music cassette. What are your thoughts on Doctor Who? I haven't watched a lot of it, so I can't really say. You could also watch Dark Matter and do a video, says John Burns in his super chat. Yes, I could. I haven't watched that yet either. So, okay, I am past the time I usually get to wrap this up. So I'm going to wrap this up. Last question from B. Morset. Have you read any Star Trek novels? Any recommendations? Yes, I have read a few, but it's been a very, very long time, so I can't really recommend any current ones. I remember I read Federation by Judith and Garfield Reeves Stevens. I thought it was great, and I think I read Reunion that I thought was good, and Imzadi, I think, by Peter David was pretty good, but those are all old as shit. I haven't read any recent ones. I can't give you any recommendations for any recent ones. So anyway, that's it for this episode of Ask Away. That's it for the questions. Thank you all so much for asking, whether you are a patron asking me or you are here in the live chat. I appreciate the attention and all the questions. Check out the charity links in the description of this video, as some random geek is kind enough to remind us here in the chat. We have some friends who unfortunately need a little help financially, who are in some dire straits, and if you can possibly donate to help any of them, or at the very least share the links around on your respective social media platforms, that would be greatly appreciated by me and by our friends who need help. So please consider helping out our friends in the charity links. Also, if you enjoy what I do here on YouTube and you want to help me out, you can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives and become a patron for any amount. And part of becoming a patron is you get to ask questions for these Ask Away streams early. I put up a call for questions post the Monday before this live stream, and you can ask questions on that, and I will answer patron questions at the beginning of the show, as I do every week. So patreon.com/Steve Shives if you're interested in helping me continue to do what I do. And also, don't forget that I am a co-host of a couple of podcasts on the Let Me Listen podcast network. I'm the co-host of Late Seating with the great Jason Harding. We review classic movies and decide whether or not they deserve whatever reputation they have, whether that reputation is good or bad. Our most recent episode is about Avatar. And I'm also the co-host of the Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast where Jason and I play ensigns that are serving aboard a certain famous Federation ship embarking on a certain historic 5-year mission. It is an improv podcast. Each of our episodes takes place at the same time as a classic Star Trek episode. You can go to letmelistenpodcast.com to listen to the Ensign's Log, or it is also linked in the description. You can listen via RSS or at SoundCloud. And we love the Ensign's Log. And if you like my Star Trek stuff, if that's the main reason why you're here paying attention to me, check out the Ensign's Log. We really love doing it, and I think a lot of you will enjoy it if you haven't checked it out. So, and I'm glad that a lot of you are listening to it. It's the most popular podcast on the Let Me Listen podcast family, so I think that's great, and I'm really grateful to you for listening to it. That's it, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for the questions. Have a good weekend. I will see you in 2 weeks to do this again, and until then, take care, everybody. Thanks for watching.